All right. So let's start. So this is the case study that we have. So we will go over this case study one by one and we'll look at the each and every question. Make sure that you make notes alongside me and solve these questions on your notebook with me so that you also understand how to write an answer and how to phrase your answers. All right. So the source material says that will Senegal escape poverty? And there's some information given to us that their population currently. So the fact file says that the population is currently 19 million people. The GDP is 31 billion. The workers' remittances as a percentage of GDP is 9%, and their HDI value is 0.5, right? So 0.5 HDI value means that it's a medium developed country, right? So HDI value ranges from 0 to 1, and within that 0 to 1 means that if it's between 0 to zero point 0.5, um, zero point 0.5, it's a low developed country. If it's between 0.5 to 0.7, a medium developed country. And then from 0.7 to 1, it's a highly developed country, right? So it's at a medium level of development, neither very low developed country, neither a very high developed country. Then it says that Senegal, a northeast African country, has some of its workers employed in other countries. So that means its workers are working in abroad. These workers send a percentage of their wages home to their relatives. So, again, that's what we call remittances. And this money is known as workers' remittances. So the case already directly tells you what it is. Due to their relatively low incomes, most Senegalese households spend all of these remittances, right? So when they say spend all of their remittances, this basically means that they have no savings, right? So there is no opportunity for them to save because all of the incomes that they get, they just spend it, right? And then, however, some households do not spend all of their money that they receive when the interest rates are high or when the confidence is low, right? So it gives us two reasons why some households don't spend all of it. It's when the interest rate is high, so they would prefer putting it in banks to get returns out of it. Yeah, when their confidence in the future of the economy is low, so that they would save for a rainy day, right? The next thing that we have is that there is a relatively high population of workers in Senegal who are employed in agriculture. The crops are the crops grown in Senegal are affected by extreme heats and droughts, right? So that means unstable. There are unstable weather conditions, right? And these weather conditions are one of the reasons why the country grows the crop uh, sorghum, which does not need much water during its growth. And sorghum is low in calorie, and so it can help people who consume it lose weight, right? And then it says that Senegal is a net exporter of sorghum, which means that net exporter means that it exports more of this good than it imports. And it is also the largest African exporter of rice after Nigeria, right? So it's the second largest exporter of rice. The greater use of capital equipment in production of both sorghum and rice could affect productivity. This may reduce the deficit on the current account of Senegal's balance of payments, and the Senegalese government want to develop the country's secondary and tertiary sector. So secondary means manufacturing sector, and tertiary sector means that the service based sector, right? So they basically want to improve to increase the country's GDP contribution of secondary and tertiary sector. And it says that it expects that it will reduce the poverty as measured by those living on $6.85 per day, right? So they also aim to increase the GDP per capita. And then it says that table 1.1 shows GDP per head as a percentage of population in poverty and selected countries. Now, obviously, this would be your trend analysis question ke liye, your data, right? And you can see as well, it also says that analyze the relationship between the GDP per head and the percentage of population. So you would use this data as as the trend analysis. We'll come back to this when we're at that question. A related aim of Senegalese government is to increase the country's HDI value, right? HDI is an indicator, composite indicator of three things, which is income, which is education, and thirdly, health healthcare. GDP is covered in the income, right? So you take income per capita here. In education, you take mean years of schooling, right? On average, how many years of schooling do you expect one person to get? And healthcare ke andar, you take it life expectancy at birth, right? So these are the three indicators. So when you say we want to increase these, so you want to increase the GDP per capita, you want to increase the education, which is mean years of schooling. On average, people, how many years of schooling do people have? And then you also want to increase the life expectancy. Balki yahan pe there's also given ke they can use fiscal measures to improve the three components of HDI, including the life expectancy, which is in the healthcare sector. Then it says that changes in fiscal policy can also affect the markets for Senegalese products, including gold. Among these influences, among the influences on the PED of gold are changes in incomes and availability of substitutes and the extent to which gold is seen as a luxury. So this in general is the case study that we currently have. It's not a very, I would say, technical case, but it's somewhat an easy case study. The first question says that you need to calculate the value of Senegal's workers' remittance in 2023. अब जब यहाँ पे remember this thing, when you have this value, that means you have to answer in dollars. Okay? And if we go back up, the fact file doesn't give us in dollars. It gives us their total GDP and it gives us the percentage of GDP that workers' remittances are. So it is so GDP is 31 billion and sorry. Okay. So then we have the remittances. Remittances are 9% of GDP. Understood? So 9% of GDP means that their remittances are 9 upon 100. So you'll do 9 upon 100 and you times that by 31 billion. So in 31 billion, you have, so you get $2.79 billion, right? So make sure to write this billion alongside or write down 9 zeros with it, right? Which means 2790 and then 6 zeros alongside. So either write like this or write like this. But if your writings are just 2.7 and not writing the billion alongside it, you won't get a mark. Understood? Then it says identify two influences on household spending in Senegal. If you go back up, the case study categorically mentions two. One was the confidence, and the other was the interest rates, right? So when it says identify two influences, you don't need to explain them. So just list them down. So interest rates and consumer confidence, right? So this is your 2 marks. Then it says explain one cause of a decrease in the quality of land used in agriculture in Senegal. Right? Quality excellent, right? It mentioned it over here, right? So extreme heat and droughts. So just identify it over here. So it's of 2 marks. That means it's a 1+1 policy. So state plus explain. Right? So that means you would first identify, you'd say one cause is extreme heat and droughts, which would get you the first mark. And you would explain why this reduces the quality. You can say, okay, these conditions can reduce soil moisture and make land drier, reducing its fertility and making it hard to grow crops. And that's the second mark. Does this make sense? Right? So the first three, not something which is difficult. The first 5 marks, very easy to get. The next one says, explain how a greater use of capital equipment in agriculture could reduce the deficit on their current account of balance of payment. Generally, when you're writing about the explain well, I remember it's a 2 times 2 mark policy, right? So, two reasons and two strands of explanations. So that means you would write down just two reasons why it would happen. So when you use capital equipment like machinery, like in agriculture, what you can do is you can produce more rice, you can produce more क्या कहते हैं output. That means that your productivity improves, your output increases, and as a result, you have more to export, right? And that means obviously when you export more, that would result in higher current account balance. Another reason why it could increase your current account balance is that if you produce more rice domestically, there is less need for importing it, right? So you can say that greater use of capital equipment such as machinery in modern. Yes, current account deficit means that you're importing more than you're exporting. So, where if you're using modern machinery in farming, it increases the productivity, meaning that Senegal can produce more sorghum. I think they and rice, which increases its ability to export, leading to higher export revenues and hence higher current account balance. Right? Another way is that when the domestic output increases, it reduces the reliance on imports. As a result, imports fall, re- reducing import expenditure and hence improving current account of balance of payments. Is this clear as well? Right? So just these two reasons, and that's pretty much it. The next question says that you need to draw a demand and supply diagram to show how more people trying to lose weight would affect the market for sorghum. Ab remember this thing कि when the keyword is draw, you don't need to explain. So there are 4 marks available to just draw the diagram, right? So to make that, what you're going to simply do is again, we know that sorghum is a food which helps you lose weight, and if more people are trying to lose weight, what would happen? Yes. So the demand would increase, right? So you just make a basic demand and supply diagram, right? So you label quantity on the x-axis, price on the y-axis. Acha, iske andar remember, there's always going to be 1 mark for axis labeling. There's going to be 1 mark for the initial equilibrium. There's 1 mark going to be the effect showing, and there's going to be 1 mark for the final equilibrium. So you have to make sure that you show all of these things very clearly in the diagram. So by just drawing this, I can get 1 mark, right? Then when I draw a basic demand and supply diagram, so I call this D1 and S1, and I label the quantity Q1 and the price P1, this gets me my second mark. So I've gotten 2 marks up until now. Then I need to show that the demand increases. So when I make the second demand curve and make an arrow, this is the third mark. And when I show the effect on price and quantity, this gets me the fourth mark, right? So P2 and the quantity goes to Q2. So this is now 4 marks. And you just stop over here. You don't need to explain more about it. Understood? Now, sorry? It's up to you. You can obviously you can label E1 and E2, but without that as well, it's fine. The main things are for these things. The main marks to allocation out here, right? Analyze the relationship between GDP per head and percentage of population living in poverty. So obviously, we would use this. And do you remember what I told you about whenever there's a question on trend analysis? How do you go about it? Yes? Anomaly. Excellent, right? So what you're going to do is let's use this as a reference, right? So what you need to do is the general trend. The second thing you need to do is you need to identify the theoretical backing for it, then general trend plus evidence, right? So general plus evidence, theoretical backing, and then the outlier. Outlier means the person that, sorry, the country or the data point that does not follow this trend, right? So what we're going to do is, so we'll say that general trend kya hai कि we can see as the GDP per capita rises, we can see that percentage of people living in poverty. So New Guinea has the lowest GDP, one of the lowest GDP, and Senegal has one of the lowest GDP per head, and therefore percentage of people living in poverty is highest. And Canada and Iceland have one of the highest GDP per head, and they have one of the lowest percentage of people living in poverty. Right? Now you would explain what is the general trend. So the general trend is that there is an inverse relation, right? So you would say there is an inverse, or you can say inverse, yeah, indirect or negative relationship between GDP per head and percentage of population living in poverty, right? So now you need to explain the general trend and the backing for it. So this means in general, when people have higher incomes, there would be less poverty, right? For example, now use the evidence from the case, right? For example, Iceland has the highest GDP per head at $73,500, right? And has 0% population living in poverty. Similarly, Canada has high GDP per head of 55,520 and only 0.7% population living in poverty. In contrast, Senegal has a much lower GDP and one of the highest poverty rates. Understood? So now this is my first 4 marks. Now 1 mark is for identifying the relationship, right? Oh, sorry, the the anomaly. However, you can say that क्या कहते हैं, New Guinea has one of higher GDP per head than Senegal, but it has a higher poverty rate than Senegal. And then you can explain what could be the reason for the outlier, right? So you can say, however, Papua New Guinea has a higher GDP per head than Senegal at $3,010 per head, but a higher poverty rate of 80% compared to Senegal, right? This may be because incomes are unevenly distributed and GDP does not account for it. So the relationship is not perfect and outlier exists, right? So this is now my answer for this one. Is this clear? So always follow these three steps: the general trend, some evidence, what's the theoretical backing for it, and then what's the outlier in this case, right? Then we have a 6 mark question which says, discuss whether or not fiscal policy measures would increase the country's HDI value, right? So now what you need to do is, it's not necessarily related with the case, but what you need to do is you need to write down how fiscal, so so you would have up to 4 marks for why it will increase HDI, and then up to 4 marks for why it will not increase HDI. Understood? And the general method is two reasons per side, or you can also adopt a 2:1 um, as well. But on the safe side, I would say go for two reasons per side. Okay. So you can say fiscal policy can increase the HDI if uses, government increases spending on healthcare and improve hospitals and access to doctors. This can help increase the life expectancy and therefore increase, um, improve the health index of HDI, therefore thereby increasing its value, right? Second reason, you can say furthermore, um, spending on education and improved schooling and training can improve literacy rates, and this improves the education index of HDI, thereby increasing the HDI value, right? So just two reasons, and both explained to some extent. Now you would write down why it may not, right? So you would write, however, fiscal policy may not increase the HDI because if क्या कहते हैं, the spending is poorly targeted or affected by corruption, it will not necessarily lead to improved education and health outcomes, which can result in HDI falling. Does this make sense? Yeah. Secondly, you can say secondly, fiscal policy takes a long time to improve HDI, right? This is because spending on education will produce results which will come over a number of years. Hence, by the time the results are evident, economic reality may have changed, or you can say it doesn't increase the HDI value instantly, right? So that's now the counter argument. And that is pretty much the answer for this question. Does this make sense? Any questions so far? So this is the overall case study of the Feb March 2026. I hope it's clear.